This is lesson 29 for the revolutions of 1989. Why did revolution sweep through the East Bloc in 1989, and what were the immediate consequences? So, this is the last lesson of the course. It's a milestone. It's been quite a journey. So let's finish strong. College Board Topic 9.1, Contextualizing Cold War and Contemporary Europe. Explain the context in which the Cold War developed, spread, and ended in Europe. Demographic changes, economic growth, total war, disruptions of traditional social patterns, and competing definitions of freedom and justice altered the experiences of everyday life. And, as we've already seen, new voices gained prominence in political, intellectual, and social discourse. And we still have College Board Topic 9.4, Two superpowers emerge. Explain the economic and political consequences of the Cold War for Europe. The rise of new nationalisms in Central and Eastern Europe brought peaceful revolution in most countries, but resulted in instability in some former Soviet republics. College Board Topic 9.5, Post-war nationalism, ethnic conflict, and atrocities. Explain the causes and effects of mass atrocities in the period following World War II to the present. Nationalist and separatist movements, along with ethnic conflict and ethnic cleansing, periodically disrupted the post-World War II peace. New nationalisms in Central and Eastern Europe resulted in war and genocide in the Balkans. And we have College Board Topic 9.7, The Fall of Communism. Explain the causes and effects of the end of the Cold War. The collapse of the USSR in 1991 ended the Cold War and led to the establishment of capitalist economies throughout Eastern Europe. Germany was reunited, the Czechs and the Slovaks parted, Yugoslavia dissolved, and the European Union was enlarged through the admission of former Eastern Bloc countries. And we have College Board Topic 9.10, the European Union. Explain how the formation and existence of the European Union influenced economic developments throughout the period following World War II to the present. European states began to set aside nationalist rivalries in favor of economic and political integration, forming a series of transnational unions that grew in size and scope over the second half of the 20th century. As the economic alliance known as the European Coal and Steel Community, envisioned as a means to spur post-war economic recovery, developed into the European Economic Community, EEC, or Common Market, and the European Union, EU, Europe experienced increasing economic and political integration and efforts to establish a shared European identity. Also, Topic 9.10. Explain how the European Union affected national and European identity throughout the period following World War II to the present. EU member nations continue to balance questions of national sovereignty with the responsibilities of membership in an economic and political union. And we have College Board Topic 9.8, 20th Century Feminism. Explain how women's roles and status developed and changed throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The lives of women were defined by family and work responsibilities, economic changes, and feminism. New models of marriage, partnership, motherhood, divorce, and reproduction gave women more options in their personal lives. And we have College Board Topic 9.14, 20th and 21st Century Culture, Arts, and Demographic Trends. Explain how and why European culture changed from the period following World War II to the present. Various movements, including women's movements, political and social movements, gay and lesbian movements, and others, worked for expanded civil rights, in some cases obtaining the goals they sought, and in others facing strong opposition. The place, still basically Eastern Europe, and the time frame, officially 1989, but we're going to get it up to the year 2000. Key concepts of the revolutions of 1989. German reunification, ethnic cleansing, the Alliance for Germany Party, the Soviet coup attempt, and the Velvet Revolution. Key people of the revolutions of 1989. János Kadar, Miklós Németh, Nicolae Ceaușescu, Slobodan Milosevic, and Boris Yeltsin. Intro. In the last lesson, 29.3, we saw how Mikhail Gorbachev molded government policy in the Soviet Bloc around the important concepts of perestroika and glasnost. He wanted to reform communism. Be careful of what you wish for. That plan spun into something Gorbachev could not control. The consequences of perestroika and glasnost were that revolutions broke out all over the Soviet bloc. What could the Soviet Union do about the revolutions of 1989? When protest happens in one place, like Hungary or Czechoslovakia, and you can pin it on one government leader like Imre Nagy or Alexander Dubček, it's easy to crush. But when protests are happening everywhere at once, including in your own backyard, and you can't pin it to a single government leader or even a government at all, it's like you're playing a nightmare game of whack-a-mole that you can't even plan for. These revolutions had four major consequences. Number one, the various peoples of the East Bloc gained political freedom from the Soviet Union for the first time in 40 years. Number two, Germany was reunified in 1990. East Germany and West Germany became one country again, and Germany was, once again, the most powerful country in Europe. And number three, these East Bloc revolutions spread to the Soviet Union itself, breaking the 15 Soviet socialist republics into Russia and 14 other completely independent countries. And four, finally, the United States became the one remaining superpower in the world for the time being. The collapse of communism in the East Bloc. Even though the revolutions of 1989 were a surprise, they really should not have been a surprise. These East Bloc countries had not recovered economically from the challenges and crises that we talked about in Lesson 29.2. And these countries were in massive financial debt to the West. They had continued to throw investment into antiquated industries. They had continued to fund extensive social welfare systems, all with money that they had borrowed from Western banks and governments in the futile hope that they could fund some kind of economic miracle. 40 years of limits on personal and political freedoms had created a swell of resentment at the injustice of these limits. So you had this deadly communism-killing combination of economic stagnation and popular anger reaching a boiling point that spilled over in 1989. Poland began this 1989 phenomenon. In Lesson 29.3, we studied the emergence of the trade union known as Solidarity, as well as the time it spent as an outlawed and underground organization. But let's also not dismiss the Polish people. We learned in Lesson 29.3 that ordinary workers can strike to get their demands taken seriously. Corporations hate trade unions because they can declare strikes. In 1988, Polish dissatisfaction with rampant inflation exploded into a series of nationwide strikes. Solidarity refused to cooperate with Poland's military government to bring the workers back. And Poland faced a total economic meltdown, and the government was desperate. Finally, in 1989, the Polish government offered to negotiate with Solidarity if it would get its members to get back on the job. In April, the government signed an agreement with Solidarity, and Solidarity would now be legal. A large minority of parliamentary seats would be up for grabs in free elections in June. In return for all that, Solidarity promised to get the workers back on the job. Solidarity had now morphed from being just a trade union to a full-fledged political party in a multi-party system where the Communist Party only had a guaranteed majority. In the June parliamentary elections, the Communist Party found out that its guaranteed majority was not as guaranteed as it appeared on paper. Solidarity won almost all of the contested seats in Parliament, and this gave Solidarity a strong representative minority by itself. The Communist Party was still running uncontested for the majority of seats, and this meant that the Communist Party candidates' names were the only names on the ballots. However, many voters physically crossed off those names and physically wrote in the names of non-communist leaders. Apparently, this was legal, and the substituted names were accepted. And because of this, the Communist Party and Solidarity were both strong minorities in the new Polish parliament. Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa was able to get two other minor parties to form a coalition with Solidarity and thus attain a majority. And because of this new majority over the Communist Party, Solidarity was able to get one of its leaders, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, sworn in as Poland's new prime minister. And he was a non-communist. And this meant that communism had now fallen in Poland. Upon winning the majority in the Polish parliament, Solidarity began the cautious, methodical process of rooting the communists out of the Polish government. They didn't want to alarm either the Polish army or the Soviet Union. They got rid of the secret police. They slowly fired communist ministers, and they finally got rid of Communist Party leader General Wojciech Jaruzelski himself. Economically, Solidarity was much more radical. They wanted to do away with central state planning. They wanted to move to a market-based economy with private ownership of businesses. They got rid of price controls on January 1st, 1990, and they reformed the Polish monetary system. Hungary was the next East Bloc communist government to fall. Hungarian Communist Party leader János Kadar had been a moderate communist. He had spent decades keeping the Communist Party in power by granting modest concessions of political liberty in exchange for continued loyalty to Communist Party control. Liberal opposition groups to the Communist Party had slowly chipped away at Communist Party power, accepting these modest concessions. But in May of 1988, the Communist Party had to grant an even bigger concession to the increasingly impatient liberals. They retired Kadar and replaced him with a more liberal communist. But even that didn't work. The liberal opposition groups in Hungary were not satisfied. By the summer of 1989, it was clear that the Communist Party would have to take drastic steps to appease the liberal reformers and stay in power. The communist government announced that there would be free elections in March 1990, and they had that long to build up as much popular support as they possibly could in order to win big in those elections. And so they invited lots of Western investment to bolster the economy. But the really big consequential thing Hungary's government did was to dismantle all the barbed wire between Hungary and Austria that had been keeping people from going into Austria. The reason they did this was to give Hungarians access to Austrian goods and services that were harder to get in Hungary. Austria was a free and democratic country, not part of the East Bloc, obviously. And the opening was celebrated with a peace demonstration called the Pan-European Picnic. And during the festivities, hundreds of East Germans who were in Hungary on holiday rushed to the open border into Austria and freedom before the border could be closed again. The Iron Curtain had been breached that day, and there was very little that East Germany, Hungary, or Mikhail Gorbachev could do to stop it. From Austria, these East Germans would get into West Germany and become West German citizens automatically. Tens of thousands of East German vacationers poured into Hungary, camping out anywhere they could. This was all far too many people for Hungary to just send back to East German authorities, and winter weather would arrive soon. So the only option seemed to be letting these refugees proceed west into Austria. But the Hungarian Prime Minister Miklós Németh was extremely worried about what action Mikhail Gorbachev would take from the Soviet Union. Hungarian Prime Minister Miklós Németh took a chance with Mikhail Gorbachev. He flew to West Germany and personally told West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl that he had decided to permanently open the border between Hungary and Austria so that all these East Germans could get into Austria and then into West Germany. Helmut Kohl called Gorbachev to warn him about what Miklós Németh was going to do. And Gorbachev's only response was that Miklós Németh quote, was a good man, unquote. The border was reopened on September 11th, 1989, and 30,000 East Germans crossed from Hungary into Austria. All of this activity with East Germans crossing freely into Austria had massive ramifications on East Germany itself. Homegrown, spontaneous protest movements erupted all over East Germany. Workers allied with intellectuals, church ministers, and environmentalists. There were stayers and there were leavers in East Germany. And the stayers could not convince the leavers that there was a future for them in East Germany. In November of 1989, the East German government took a drastic step in order to try to stabilize this mass exodus that was going on from the country and into Hungary, Austria, and West Germany. They saw no other choice but to declare the Berlin Wall open. There were massive celebrations for days, and finally, East Germany's communist government had to step down, and a new reform government took over and declared free elections. By now, these revolutions in Poland, Hungary, and East Germany had established a clear sense of inevitability throughout the Soviet Bloc. Czechoslovakia was the next to turn in the Velvet Revolution. Czech playwright Václav Havel was leading protests of students and intellectuals in the streets of Prague. This was the same Václav Havel who had participated in Charter 77 from Lesson 29.3. In November and December of 1989, it was obvious that these protesters had taken control of the streets. So the communist Czech government literally resigned from their positions. A new government, the Government of National Understanding, replaced it. The Czechoslovakian Assembly elected Václav Havel as president, and this peaceful Czech revolution became known as the Velvet Revolution. In fact, the only revolution of 1989 which had significant violence was in Romania. Communist dictator Nicolae Ceaușescu had ruled Romania since about 1967. He had ruled as a totalitarian who had actually starved his people throughout the 1980s with severe austerity measures. He claimed the Romanian people were eating too much. And in December of 1989, his country faced mass protests. He ordered his security forces to deal harshly with the protesters, and they killed about 750 people. But instead of quelling the unrest, this action sparked an uprising that Ceaușescu could not control. Ceaușescu and his wife were both captured and executed by a military court by firing squad. The execution was called, quote, shameful but necessary. Romania's communist totalitarian government was replaced by a coalition government. German unification and the end of the Cold War. This was all dominated by the German question. What should East Germany and West Germany do? That was still an open question in 1989. Many feared a powerful, vengeful, reunited Germany. Germany hadn't been united since World War II. The new East German government believed that it could lead a continuing East Germany. It would be more democratic and more responsive to the needs of its people than the previous Stalinist East Germany had been. But it would be more socialistic than West Germany, which they saw as steeped in ruthless, greed-based capitalism. However, East Germany was not to survive as an independent country for long at all. It died quickly for three reasons. Number one, dreams of a reunified Germany awakened in the German people almost immediately. Within a week of the opening of the border, 9 million East Germans crossed the border to visit old friends and relatives. That was about half the population. Such visits were to produce a lot of popular support for reunification. Number two, Helmut Kohl and the Alliance for Germany party. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl was in complete support of German reunification. He was also sure that the United States would support German reunification. In November 1989, Kohl presented a 10-point plan for reunification. It incorporated voluntary cooperation from both East Germany and the international community. He promised that East Germans could exchange their savings and retirement accounts mark for West German marks, which were more valuable. Helmut Kohl was, as we have learned, a Christian Democrat in West Germany, and his party, the Christian Democrats, had quickly supported the establishment of an East German counterpart party, the Alliance for Germany Party. Helmut Kohl's unification plan made the Alliance for Germany Party very popular in East Germany. In March 1990, this Alliance for Germany Party won big in East German parliamentary elections. Once in power, the Alliance for Germany Party negotiated an economic and political union with Helmut Kohl. It all happened so quickly that the socialists who wanted to maintain an independent East Germany were taken by surprise. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was persuaded to go along with the reunification. This was a difficult thing for Gorbachev to do. Germany had invaded Russia twice in just the last century, wreaking devastation. A reunified Germany was a major security concern for the Soviet Union. In July of 1990, Kohl and Gorbachev agreed that Germany should be unified. In exchange, Kohl promised that Germany would never develop nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. Germany also promised the Soviet Union huge, much-needed loans. In October 1990, East and West Germany were reunited. The peaceful reunification of Germany established the momentum for other important accomplishments toward world peace. In November 1990, 22 Western nations, along with the Soviet Union, met and established the Charter of Paris for a New Europe. This was a general peace treaty that officially ended not only the Cold War, but also World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union both signed agreements that canceled huge portions of their nuclear programs. In 1991, both countries ended their around-the-clock atomic weapons alert status. The disintegration of the Soviet Union. By 1990, the only two die-hard communist countries left in Europe were the Soviet Union and Albania. When we left the Soviet Union in Lesson 29.3, Gorbachev had promised free elections in 1989. The Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics. Russia was by far the largest of those 15 republics, but the other 14 were primarily non-Russian. These were demanding more autonomy or even complete independence from the Soviet Union. The Communist Party lost big in local elections throughout the Soviet Union. Democrats and anti-communists won lots of majorities all over the country. One of those 15 Soviet republics, Lithuania, revolted entirely. The people elected a clear nationalist as their president. As we've said many times, communism says that the nation is irrelevant. It says that class is the important thing, not nation. Then, Lithuania's new parliament declared Lithuania to be an independent country. If this was allowed by Gorbachev, it would be the breakup of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev limited his response to economic sanctions rather than military action. To break the political stalemate between the Soviet Union and its upstart breakaway republic, Lithuania, Gorbachev proposed major reforms to the Soviet system. He put a new constitution to a nationwide vote, and this constitution would end the Communist Party's legal monopoly on political power. It also expanded the power of the Congress of People's Deputies, which was their parliament. These changes were going to make the Soviet Union much more democratic. He also convinced the Congress of People's Deputies to make him president of the Soviet Union. But this victory was short-lived. There was a group of senior Communist Party members who wanted to keep the old, strict communist system. In August of 1991, they tried to seize control of the Soviet government. They wanted to restore the Soviet Union to the way it had been before: communist power, state ownership, a multinational Soviet Union. This was the group who placed Gorbachev and his family under house arrest while they were vacationing in Crimea. Gorbachev was now caught in the middle between the nationalist Boris Yeltsin and the communist old guard, who literally held him hostage. Boris Yeltsin stood on a tank in Red Square and defied the coup-plotting communists in favor of the changes that Gorbachev had been attempting. And it was played out all over television for the world to see. Luckily, the Red Army supported Yeltsin instead of the communists who were holding Gorbachev hostage. Gorbachev was rescued, and the communist coup attempt failed. As a result of the coup's spectacular failure, an anti-communist revolution swept Russia. Boris Yeltsin outlawed the entire Communist Party in Russia, and he declared Russia independent and withdrew from the Soviet Union. He then changed the country's name to the Russian Federation. All the other Soviet republics likewise withdrew from the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as the USSR's leader on December 25, 1991, and the next day, the Supreme Soviet voted to dissolve itself. The 15 republics established a loose confederation that would be called the Commonwealth of Independent States. The Soviet Union was no more. The Cold War, at least as the world had experienced it thus far, was over. Where do we go from here? This is where chapter 29 of our textbook ends. The AP exam is supposed to stop at the year 2000. What could possibly be on the AP exam that we haven't talked about yet? It's not very likely at all that there will be much from between 1990 and the year 2000, but we could mention a few things. We could talk about the Velvet Divorce. We mentioned the Velvet Revolution, the bloodless revolution which ended communist rule in Czechoslovakia in 1989. But Czechoslovakia, as we know, had actually been an artificial creation after the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of World War I. It was a combination of two ethnic peoples, Czechs and Slovaks. The dissolution of Czechoslovakia was actually not popular with a majority of both Czechs and Slovaks. But many politicians on both sides wanted it because their political parties were not compatible. Hero of the Velvet Revolution, Václav Havel, actually resigned as president because he was opposed to the breakup. The Czech Republic and Slovakia officially became independent of each other on January 1st, 1993. Economically, the breakup was harder on the new Republic of Slovakia than on the Czech Republic. Some jokingly called the Velvet Divorce the sandpaper divorce for Slovakia. We could talk about Boris Yeltsin. He went on to be the leader of Russia all the way up until 1999. He tried a shock therapy approach to jump-starting Russia's failing economy. He rushed through a massive privatization program of all of Russia's state-owned companies and industries. But in doing so, Yeltsin created the community of rich and powerful, often criminal, billionaire oligarchs who would become the mafia-like power base of his successor, Vladimir Putin. These oligarchs would immediately abuse the power they had to make themselves richer at the expense of ordinary Russians. Yeltsin also took most of the price controls off of consumer goods, causing massive inflation and a decline in living standards for regular people. We could also talk about the formation of the European Union. The European Common Market officially gave itself that name in 1993. The Maastricht Treaty of 1991 formed the basis for the European Union, the EU. And this treaty set financial and cultural standards for member countries to follow, and it defined criteria for joining the EU. The EU added the free movement of capital, services, goods, and people to and from any member nations. And by the year 2000, membership in the EU had risen to 14 states. Since 2000, its membership has risen to 27 members, down from the previous 28 thanks to Brexit. These newer members include the former East Bloc countries of Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. Finally, we could talk about the ethnic cleansing that went on in the mid-1990s. The ethnically hodgepodge country of Yugoslavia broke up into its 6 component republics. One of those republics was Serbia. Serbia's president from 1989 to 1997 was Slobodan Milosevic. Milosevic believed that the Yugoslav constitution gave self-determination to nations, not republics. That's a critical distinction, because therefore Serbia had the right to grab any neighboring territories that had ethnic Serbs living there. Milosevic wanted to create a greater Serbia, just like the Serb dream from Lesson 25.1 that led to World War I. In pursuit of that goal, Serbia grabbed territory from both Croatia and Slovenia. Slovenia repulsed Serbia's attack, but Serbia took about a third of Croatia's territory. Milosevic put severe restrictions on a territory in southern Serbia called Kosovo, where the majority of people were ethnic Albanians. In 1992, civil war broke out in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which had an Islamic majority and a Serb minority. And Milosevic took this opportunity to invade Bosnia-Herzegovina on behalf of ethnic Serbs who simply did not want to live under the authority of Muslims. Milosevic engaged in ethnic cleansing in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Serbia launched a campaign of brutal murder, rape, destruction, and capturing of non-Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Milosevic also starved people in concentration camps there. And by the time it was over, Milosevic had killed about 300,000 people and forced about 1 million more to leave their homes. In July 1995, Bosnian Serbs killed about 8,000 men and boys in the Muslim town of Srebrenica. The images from all of the brutality got the world's attention. NATO bombed Bosnian Serb military targets, and NATO also bombed Serbia directly for refusing to stop driving ethnic Albanians out of Kosovo. President Bill Clinton helped to hammer out a territorial treaty in 1995, and troops from NATO and the United Nations had to keep the peace there until 2013. Well, it's been quite a year. We've come a long way since we talked about the High Middle Ages back in the summer reading and viewing room. We've come a long way since we talked about the Renaissance. Along the way, we've learned about countless ideas and concepts that have shaped our views, our values, and our experiences. So what does the future hold? No doubt our views will be shaped by the new ethical issues around technologies such as cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Democracy, equality, and freedom will either expand or contract depending on how well we look after each other and not just ourselves. Our priorities will be influenced by climate change whether we believe in it or not. And there will always be people with a lust for power who will use fear, hate, ignorance, grievance, lies, and war to get what they want. Hopefully, this course has equipped you with a knowledge and an awareness that will make you a more savvy and more human actor in the future of our civilization. Knowledge is power. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.